The air in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was thick with the scent of $100,000 worth of white roses and the self-satisfied perfume of old money. Ebony Williams stood at the altar, a radiant vision in a Vera Wang gown that had cost more than she'd earned in the last 5 years combined. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure, unadulterated joy. This was it. The moment God had promised her, the culmination of every prayer whispered in the dark of her tiny Bronx apartment. The officiant, a bland, smiling man in a tailored suit, turned to her fiancé. "Blake Sterling, do you take this woman, Ebony Williams, to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Blake, impossibly handsome in his Tom Ford tuxedo, let a cruel smirk curl his lips. He leaned into the microphone, his voice a gunshot in the silent room. "Fuck no." A collective gasp rippled through the 300 guests, a veritable who's who of New York City's financial and social elite. Before anyone could process the raw, public brutality of his rejection, the grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Blake's cousin, Tiffany Sterling, emerged, pushing a gilded cart bearing the towering 5-tier wedding cake. She wore a tight, sequined dress that did nothing to hide the swollen curve of her belly. "Surprise, you dumb bitch," Tiffany sneered, her voice dripping with venomous glee. "I'm 6 months pregnant with Blake's baby." Blake turned to Ebony, his blue eyes as cold and dead as a winter sky. The faux adoration he had perfected over 2 years was gone, replaced by a sneer of utter contempt. "Your fucking purity was a bore, Ebony. This whole good Christian girl act was grating on my last nerve. I wanted a woman with some real experience, not some charity case from the ghetto who thinks praying solves everything." And then, in front of the assembled titans of industry and their diamond-draped wives, he shoved her. Hard. Ebony stumbled backward, her heels catching in the plush carpet. She fell, a blur of white silk and shattered dreams, directly into the mountain of buttercream and fondant. The world exploded in a sticky, humiliating mess, destroying her dress, her dignity, and her life in a single god-awful second. To understand how Ebony arrived at this moment of devastating annihilation, we have to rewind 2 years, back to a life that felt 1,000,000 miles away from the opulent cage of Manhattan's elite. Back when she still lived in the South Bronx, a world of cracked pavement, peeling paint, and the relentless symphony of sirens. Ebony Williams was 22, but she carried the weight of a woman twice her age on her slender shoulders. Her life was a grueling, thankless cycle dedicated to keeping her family afloat. Her mother, Martha, was slowly being consumed by type 2 diabetes, her body a battlefield of failing organs and chronic pain. Her 2 younger brothers, Jamal and Deshaun, were still in high school, navigating the treacherous hallways where poverty and violence were as much a part of the curriculum as algebra. Her day began at 4:30 a.m. to the shrill, unapologetic scream of a cheap alarm clock, a sound that sliced through the pre-dawn stillness of their cramped 3-bedroom apartment. She'd quietly prepare a simple breakfast, oatmeal and weak coffee, for the family, check to make sure her mother had taken her morning insulin and blood pressure pills, and then sprint out the door to catch the first downtown 4 train. The long, rattling journey to the financial heart of the city was her only quiet time. A brief interlude where she'd pull a small, dog-eared Bible from her purse. Ebony worked as a cleaner at Sterling Tower, a gleaming 80-story monument to capitalism on Wall Street. It was back-breaking, soul-crushing labor, 17 floors of pristine corporate offices, home to million-dollar deals and men who wouldn't piss on her if she were on fire. But she never complained. To Ebony, honest work was a blessing from God, a shield against the temptations that swallowed so many young women in her neighborhood. What set Ebony apart from the other cleaners, the weary, cynical women who had long since surrendered to the bitterness of their lot, was her unshakable, almost infuriating faith. Even on the hardest days, when the cupboards at home were nearly bare and the medical bills piled up like snowdrifts, she clung to her faith like a drowning woman to a life raft. During her 30-minute lunch break, while the others bitched about their aching backs and shitty pay, Ebony would find a quiet corner in a deserted conference room and lose herself in the Psalms. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." She'd repeat the words to herself, like a mantra, a shield against the despair that was always clawing at the edges of her mind. She had learned from a young age, watching her mother navigate a life of hardship with grace and prayer. That faith was the one possession no one could ever take from you. It was the only currency that truly mattered in a world obsessed with a different kind of green. Sundays were her sanctuary. Ebony would wake even earlier, pressing her family's best clothes and hustling them out the door for the 10-block walk to the New Hope Pentecostal Church. It was a small, humble congregation in a converted storefront, but inside, the spirit was a roaring fire. Her mother, her mobility limited by her illness, would stay home, but she always sent Ebony with her prayers and a crumpled dollar bill for the collection plate, a tithe saved penny by penny. At church, Ebony was a pillar. She sang in the choir, her voice a soaring, beautiful thing that seemed to touch the very heavens. She volunteered for every bake sale, every community outreach program, every cleanup day. Pastor John, a 60-year-old man who had dedicated his life to this forgotten corner of the city, saw something special in her. "That girl's got a light in her, a fire in her soul," he'd often tell his wife. "God has big plans for Ebony Williams. You mark my words." Ebony didn't know what those plans were, but she trusted in them implicitly. She trusted that God was guiding her every step, even when the path was dark and treacherous. This unwavering belief was a source of quiet strength, but also a source of ridicule from some of her co-workers. "Girl, you spend more time with your nose in that Bible than you do looking for a way out of this shithole," one of the older cleaners, a woman named Brenda, once sneered. "Praying ain't gonna pay your mama's hospital bills. You need to find yourself a rich man. Use what God gave you." Brenda and the others had warned her about the men at Sterling Tower. "You be careful, baby girl," she'd said, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "These rich white boys in their fancy suits, they look at girls like us like we're something to be eaten. They'll chew you up and spit you out without a second thought. Don't you be fooled by their smooth talk and easy smiles." But Ebony wasn't interested in rich men. Her focus was singular. Work hard, provide for her family, and deepen her connection with God. She had made a covenant with herself and with her Lord. She would save herself for a man who shared her faith, a man who would respect her mind and her spirit, not just her body. During her lunch breaks, Ebony had found a secret place of peace. She would take the service elevator all the way up to the rooftop garden, a small, manicured oasis reserved for the building's top executives. It was her private sanctuary, a place where she could feel closer to God, surrounded by the endless expanse of the city skyline. It was there, during one of her silent prayers, that she made the request that would irrevocably alter the course of her destiny. "Lord," she whispered, her eyes closed against the bright afternoon sun, "I trust in your plan for my life. If it is your will for me to find a partner, please send me a man who fears you and will love me for who I am. But if your plan is for me to remain single, to care for my family, I accept that too. Thy will be done." She had no idea that her quiet moments of devotion had not gone unnoticed. She had no idea that she was being watched, studied, by a predator who had decided she would be his next project, his next sick game. Someone who would take her most sacred belief, her faith, and twist it into a weapon to be used against her. As Ebony finished her prayer and prepared to return to the drudgery of her work, she felt a strange premonition, a tingling sense that something momentous was about to happen. She mistook it for a sign from God, a promise of good things to come. She was wrong. For the past several weeks, Blake Sterling had been observing her every move. He had studied her routine, her habits, her innocent piety, and he had devised a cruel, meticulous plan that would span nearly 2 years, a plan that would culminate in the most profound and public humiliation a woman could possibly endure on what should have been the happiest day of her life. The following Monday, Ebony was finishing up on the 65th floor when the private executive elevator chimed unexpectedly. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 7:30 p.m. All the big shots had cleared out hours ago. Who the hell would be coming up at this hour? She quickly pushed her cleaning cart into an alcove, making herself small and invisible, a habit ingrained in her from years of working around the powerful and entitled. The polished steel doors slid open, and out stepped a man who radiated wealth and authority like a physical force. He was tall, around 35, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than her car. Blake Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Capital, the man whose name was emblazoned on the damn building. He was a corporate demigod, a fixture in the gossip columns, usually pictured with a supermodel on his arm. In the months prior, during his late-night meetings, he had noticed the young, beautiful black cleaner who went to the roof to pray. Something about her quiet dignity and anachronistic piety had sparked his sick curiosity. She was so pure, so untouched by the filth of the world he inhabited. And Blake Sterling loved nothing more than to corrupt and destroy beautiful, pure things. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth and practiced as he approached her. He gave her a smile that could charm the panties off a nun. "You're Ebony, aren't you?" Ebony's heart leaped into her throat. How in the world did this man know her name? She immediately thought of Brenda's warnings. "Yes, sir. Can I help you with something?" she replied, her tone strictly professional, her eyes fixed on a point just over his shoulder. Blake's smile widened. He had already run a full background check on her. He knew about her diabetic mother, her brothers, her family's financial struggles, and most importantly, her deeply held religious beliefs. He knew she was a woman of rigid principles, a woman who couldn't be bought with a fancy dinner or a designer handbag. This would be a challenge. This would be fun. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something else," he said, his tone shifting to one of feigned sincerity. "I've noticed you go up to the rooftop during your lunch break. You pray up there, don't you?" Ebony flushed, a wave of hot embarrassment washing over her. Had she broken some rule? Was she about to be fired? "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know it was forbidden. I promise it won't happen again," she stammered, her gaze dropping to the floor. No, not at all," Blake said quickly, injecting a note of concern into his voice. "You haven't done anything wrong. On the contrary, I was impressed with your devotion. You see, I'm a man of faith myself." Ebony looked up, her surprise evident. A Wall Street CEO talking about faith? That was about as common as a unicorn. This was the opening he had been waiting for. "You attend the New Hope Pentecostal Church in the Bronx, right?" he asked, the feigned casualness perfected after hours of practice. Ebony's eyes widened. How did you know that?" "I have a few acquaintances in the city's faith community. I'd heard whispers about a young woman at that church, a woman with a powerful spirit who was a true pillar of her community. I put 2 and 2 together." The lie was seamless. delivered with the conviction of a seasoned con artist. Blake had never set foot in a church that didn't look like a European cathedral, let alone a storefront Pentecostal church in the Bronx. "You know, Ebony," he continued, leaning against the wall, creating an illusion of intimacy, "I've been feeling a bit spiritually adrift lately. This world," he gestured around the opulent hallway, "it can be very empty. I've been looking for a new church home, a place with a real, authentic spirit. Do you think I might be welcome at your church on Sunday?" Ebony was utterly bewildered. This handsome, powerful, obscenely wealthy white man wanted to come to her humble church in the hood? It seemed impossible, but there was a look in his eye, a carefully crafted vulnerability that seemed genuine. "Of course, sir. Everyone is welcome in the house of the Lord," she replied, still cautious. "Blake?" he corrected her, extending his hand. "Please, call me Blake." She hesitated before taking his hand. His grip was firm, his skin smooth. "Ebony." "Thank you, Ebony. Perhaps you could give me the address and maybe your phone number, so I can confirm the time of the service?" Giving her number to a stranger, especially a rich executive, went against every warning bell screaming in her head. I don't have a phone, sir. I mean, Blake, but I can write down the address for you." Blake feigned a look of convincing surprise. "No phone? My goodness, that must be difficult, especially with your mother's health issues. I imagine you worry about her when you're working late." He had hit a nerve, just as his research had told him he would. Ebony looked away, embarrassed by the stark reality of her poverty. "We manage, sir." "Blake," he corrected gently again. "And listen, I don't want to overstep, but I have a few old iPhones lying around at home. I'd be happy to give one to you for your family, for emergencies." "No, sir, thank you, but I can't accept that," she said quickly, her pride kicking in. Blake smiled internally. Perfect. Her integrity was exactly what made the game so exhilarating. "I understand, and I respect that. It shows you have character," he said, hitting all the right notes. "But how about this? I'll come to the service on Sunday. I'll meet your family. And then, as a brother in faith, we can see if there's some way I can help. No strings attached." Ebony considered it. If he was truly seeking God, who was she to stand in his way? Perhaps God was using her to touch this powerful man's heart. "Okay. The service starts at 10 a.m. The address is 245 East Tremont Avenue. Perfect," Blake said, his smile triumphant but well disguised. "I'll see you on Sunday, Ebony, and thank you truly for this opportunity." As Blake stepped back into the elevator, Ebony stood frozen in the hallway, a strange, electric feeling coursing through her. Her intuition told her this meeting would change her life forever. She interpreted it as a divine signal, a sign that her prayers were being answered. She had no way of knowing that Blake Sterling was the devil in a bespoke suit, and that Sunday would be the first act in a long, cruel, and meticulously staged play. A farce that would end with her on her knees, covered in cake and humiliation, in front of the entire world. Blake had a script, and Ebony Williams was just the unwitting star of his sadistic show. The following Sunday, Ebony woke with a nervous energy she couldn't quite place. She prepared breakfast and helped her mother, but her mind kept drifting to the man who had promised to show up at her church. "You seem different today, baby girl," her mother Martha said, her tired eyes full of maternal wisdom. "Something happened at work." Ebony hesitated. "An executive from the building. He said he wants to visit our church today. He said he's looking for God." Martha frowned, her life experience having taught her a deep and abiding suspicion of rich white men showing an interest in poor black women. "Ebony, you be careful. A man like that doesn't come down from his ivory tower to our little church without wanting something." "Mama, don't be like that. God can touch anyone's heart, no matter how much money they have," Ebony replied, though a small seed of her mother's doubt took root in her mind. When they arrived at the church, Blake was already there, chatting easily with Pastor John. Ebony was surprised to see him dressed down in dark slacks and a simple, yet obviously expensive, white button-down shirt. He looked less like a corporate raider and more like a regular person, albeit a very polished one. "Ebony," he called out, approaching with that same warm, disarming smile. "So good to see you. And this must be your family." Ebony made the introductions. Blake shook her brother's hands and greeted her mother with a respectful charm that seemed utterly genuine. Martha watched his every move with a hawk's eye, unconvinced. But Jamal and Deshawn were immediately impressed by the visitor's charisma. During the service, Blake was the model guest. He sang the hymns with gusto, his voice surprisingly strong. He listened intently to Pastor John's sermon, taking notes in a brand-new, leather-bound Bible. When the pastor asked visitors to introduce themselves, Blake stood with an easy confidence. "My name is Blake. I'm a businessman here in New York, and I've been feeling a bit lost lately. A wonderful, exemplary woman named Ebony, who works in my building, told me about this congregation. I'm here today seeking a new spiritual family, and I hope I can contribute to the great work God is doing here." A murmur went through the pews. It wasn't every day a man who looked and sounded like he owned half of Manhattan showed up in their midst. Pastor John beamed, already imagining the leaky roof repaired and the youth center finally getting new computers. After the service, Blake was swarmed by curious church members. Ebony watched from a distance as he navigated their questions with practiced sincerity, talking about his business and his supposed spiritual struggles. "Ebony," he said, approaching her after the crowd had thinned, "may I walk you home? I'd like to see more of your neighborhood. I feel like God is calling me to help this community in some way." Martha interjected quickly. "That's not necessary, sir. We know the way." "Mama, it's fine," Ebony said, surprising herself with her own assertiveness. On the walk home, Blake was a master of inquiry. He asked about their family history, about Ebony's dreams, about the challenges facing the neighborhood. He listened with rapt attention, making her feel seen and heard in a way she never had before. "You know, Ebony," he said, his voice low and confidential, "I grew up in a very religious home, but I confess I strayed from the path when I got into the business world. It's a cutthroat environment, but God never gives up on us, does he?" "No, he doesn't," Ebony replied, her heart swelling. "He's always waiting for us to come back home." Blake smiled to himself. This was too easy. Her innocence was like a drug. She was the perfect mark for his twisted game. In the weeks that followed, Blake became a fixture at New Hope Pentecostal. He was always on time, always engaged, and always outrageously generous in the collection plate. He quickly became the congregation's golden boy. Ebony began to notice how people treated him with a special deference, a fact that subtly bothered her. The first hint of something truly sinister came during a lunch at the pastor's house. Blake was talking about his company and casually mentioned that his cousin worked for him. "Tiffany is a sharp girl, got her MBA from Wharton. She's a huge help with some of my bigger projects. In fact, she's always talking about wanting to get involved in charity work. Maybe I should bring her by the church sometime." Ebony noticed a strange flicker in his eyes when he said Tiffany's name, a shift in the timbre of his voice that she couldn't quite place, but she quickly dismissed it, chiding herself for being suspicious. Their first real date happened 3 months later. He invited her for coffee after the Sunday service. Ebony agreed, but insisted on a small, local coffee shop where she knew people. "Ebony, I want you to know that these past few months attending your church, they've changed my life," he said, his hand covering hers on the table. The simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through her. "And you've been the catalyst for that change." Ebony felt her face grow hot. "I didn't do anything, Blake. It was God working on your heart." "Yes, but he used you as his instrument," Blake insisted, his thumb gently caressing the back of her hand. "Ebony, can I be blunt with you? I'm falling in love with you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She snatched her hand back as if burned, her eyes darting around the coffee shop. "Blake, I don't know what to say. This is so fast." "I know, and I'll respect your pace," he said, his expression a perfect mask of understanding. "But I can't hide what I feel. You're unlike any woman I've ever met. Your faith, your purity, your strength, it's intoxicating." Ebony went home that day in a daze. For the first time in her life, a man had told her he loved her. And not just any man. A successful, handsome, and seemingly God-fearing man. She didn't realize that every word, every gesture had been scripted and rehearsed. While she was wrestling with her burgeoning feelings, Blake was already planning his next move, his next lie. A few weeks later, Blake met Tiffany at the secret penthouse apartment he kept in Soho, their private den of iniquity. "Jesus, Blake, how much longer do we have to keep up this ridiculous charade?" Tiffany asked, pouring herself a glass of champagne. "I'm getting bored." "Patience, my dear cousin," Blake said, topping off her glass. "I'm about to close a multi-billion-dollar deal with a German conglomerate. Once that's done, we move to the end game." The end game was their twisted bet. They had wagered on how far Blake could take the deception before publicly destroying Ebony. The plan was to make her fall completely in love, to build up her hopes of marriage and a family, and then to shatter her in the most spectacular and humiliating way imaginable. "You should have seen her face when I talked about a future together," Tiffany giggled maliciously. "The poor little ghetto Cinderella actually thinks she's going to be a princess." A cruel smile played on Blake's lips. "She's the type who believes in fairy tales. Grew up on that happily ever after bullshit. To her, I'm Prince fucking Charming." "So when are you popping the question?" 2 weeks. I've already got the ring. A $30,000 rock. Enough to blow her and her broke-ass family away, but pocket change for us. I'm going to do it at the top of the Empire State Building. Cheesy, romantic, cinematic. She'll eat it up." Tiffany stroked her still flat stomach. "And our little surprise? When do we drop that bomb?" "At the altar," Blake replied, his expression turning sadistic. "Picture it. She's standing there in some cheap-ass dress she thinks is fancy. All my friends and business associates are there, and then you show up, pushing the cake, and announce you're 6 months pregnant. She'll fucking die of shame." "And then you push her into the cake," Tiffany finished, her eyes alight with perverse excitement. "Exactly. I want her to remember for the rest of her miserable life how fucking stupid she was to believe a man like me would ever marry a piece of trash like her." While they plotted their cruel entertainment, Blake's silent majority partner, Marcus Thorne, was beginning to notice some financial irregularities at Sterling Capital. Marcus was a quiet, intensely private man who preferred to operate behind the scenes. But he had an eye for detail, and he'd spotted suspicious cash movements that seemed to coincide with the start of Blake's bizarre new relationship. Ebony, blissfully unaware of the conspiracy swirling around her, was living in what she believed was a dream come true. Blake had become her family's savior. He was paying for a top specialist for her mother, had enrolled her brothers in a private prep school, and had even hired a contractor to renovate their crumbling apartment. "Baby girl, it seems God has sent an angel to our family," Martha would say, her earlier suspicions completely melted away by Blake's calculated generosity. Ebony agreed, but she was sometimes troubled by strange nightmares where Blake's handsome face would twist into a demonic sneer. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, but would quickly dismiss the images as simple anxiety. A week before the planned proposal, she accidentally saw a text on Blake's phone. It was from a contact named T. It read, "Can't wait to see the look on that bitch's face when she finds out. It's going to be epic." When she confronted him, Blake was smooth. "Oh, that's just my cousin Tiffany. We're planning a surprise for a client. You know how she is with her dramatic language." Ebony accepted the explanation, wanting desperately to believe it. But a new seed of doubt, more stubborn this time, had been planted in her heart. She didn't know the message was from Tiffany, eagerly anticipating the final act of their cruel little play. She didn't know that her life was about to be systematically dismantled in the most public and soul-crushing way possible. The proposal was a masterpiece of romantic cliché, just as Blake had planned. At the top of the Empire State Building, with the glittering expanse of New York City spread out beneath them, he got down on one knee. "Ebony Williams," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion as he held up the obscenely large diamond ring. "Will you marry me and make me the happiest man on earth?" Ebony burst into tears, a messy, joyful sob, barely able to choke out the word yes. This was it. The fairy tale was real. God had answered her prayers in the most spectacular way she could have imagined. The next 10 months were a blur of wedding preparations. Blake insisted on a lavish, no-expense-spared affair at the Pierre, with 300 guests from his world of obscene wealth. Ebony felt like an imposter, a girl from the Bronx playing dress-up as a princess. "You deserve the best, my love," Blake would murmur whenever she expressed concern over the astronomical costs. What she didn't know was that Blake saw every dollar spent as an investment in her eventual humiliation. The more opulent the wedding, the more devastating her fall would be. During the planning, Tiffany became a constant, cloying presence. Blake had explained that his cousin was an expert in event planning and wanted to help. Grateful for the guidance, Ebony accepted. "Tiffany has impeccable taste," Blake would say. "She'll make sure our day is perfect." But as the months wore on, Ebony started to notice odd things. Tiffany always wore loose, flowing clothes. She'd refuse alcohol at planning meetings, claiming she was on a health kick. Several times, Ebony saw her rushing to the bathroom, looking pale and nauseous. "Are you okay, Tiffany?" Ebony asked one afternoon. "Just tired," Tiffany snapped back. "Working too hard at Blake's company?" Ebony also noticed the strange, conspiratorial looks that passed between Blake and Tiffany when they thought she wasn't watching. There was an intimacy there, a shared secret that went far beyond a normal family relationship. But every time she brought it up, Blake had a plausible, disarming answer. "She's like a daughter to me," he'd say. "Ever since her father passed away, I've been the main father figure in her life. It's only natural that we're close." 3 weeks before the wedding, Ebony's suspicions were confirmed, accidentally and devastatingly. She had stopped by Blake's office to drop off some paperwork and saw Tiffany leaving a doctor's office on the ground floor. Hiding behind a marble column, Ebony watched as Tiffany clutched what looked like an ultrasound photo. Her belly, usually hidden by baggy tops, had a distinct, rounded curve. Her heart hammered in her chest. Tiffany was pregnant. But why the secrecy? "No, don't go there, Ebony," she told herself. "She's probably dating someone and just isn't ready to tell the family." But she couldn't shake the feeling. She started paying closer attention. She noticed how Blake always knew where Tiffany was, how they texted constantly, how he grew agitated if she was late for a meeting. 2 weeks before the wedding, she confronted him directly. "Blake, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is Tiffany pregnant?" Blake hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was long enough. "Why would you ask that?" He deflected. "Because I saw her coming from the doctor with an ultrasound, because she's always sick and wearing baggy clothes." He let out a long, dramatic sigh, as if burdened by a difficult secret. "Yes, she is. But she asked me not to tell anyone. The father, the bastard, abandoned her as soon as he found out. She's going through a really tough time." A wave of relief washed over Ebony, so powerful it almost made her dizzy. Of course. That was it. She felt a pang of guilt for her ugly suspicions. "Oh, the poor thing," she said. "That's why you've been so protective of her." "Exactly," Blake said, his expression a mask of feigned empathy. "She's trying to distract herself by pouring all her energy into our wedding." Ebony threw her arms around him, mentally begging for forgiveness for ever doubting him. "Promise me you won't tell anyone I know," Blake asked, his voice low. "She wants to handle this on her own terms." "I promise," Ebony said, sealing her own fate. The day of the wedding, December 15th, dawned bright and cold. Ebony woke up in a sprawling suite at the Pierre, a place she could have never dreamed of entering, let alone sleeping in. Her mother was there, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "My baby girl," Martha whispered, hugging her tight. "I never thought I'd live to see this day. You deserve all the happiness in the world." For a fleeting moment, that old, familiar sense of unease returned, a cold shadow in the warm, sunlit room. "Mama, I'm doing the right thing, aren't I?" she asked, the words surprising even herself. "Ebony, you have the wisdom of a woman 3 times your age. If God brought this man into your life, then this union is blessed," Martha said with conviction. Meanwhile, across town in Blake's palatial penthouse, he and Tiffany were having a very different conversation. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Tiffany asked, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. "After today, there's no going back." Blake adjusted the diamond cufflinks on his shirt. "My dear, we've been planning this for 2 years. We're not going to back out now, right before the grand finale." At 11 a.m., Ebony stepped into the grand ballroom. It was a fairy tale come to life. The altar was dripping with orchids and crystals. The 300 guests were a sea of couture and jewels. As the doors opened and the organ began to play, she saw Blake standing at the altar, looking at her with what she believed was pure, undiluted love. All her doubts, all her anxieties, vanished like smoke. Pastor John, flown in and put up in a luxury hotel by Blake, beamed with pride. This was a miracle. His girl from the Bronx, marrying a man who had transformed their small church with his generosity. As she reached the altar, she looked into Blake's eyes. He smiled that smile that had captured her heart. The ceremony began. For 20 minutes, everything was perfect, but then came the final, binding question. Pastor John smiled. "Blake Sterling, do you take this woman, Ebony Williams, to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Ebony looked at Blake, her heart about to burst with love, waiting for the "I do" that would seal her happiness forever. But the words that came out of his mouth were not from any fairy tale she had ever read. They were from the depths of a nightmare. "Fuck no." The words, amplified by the microphone, cracked through the ballroom like a whip. Ebony froze, her mind unable to compute. It had to be a joke, a horrible, tasteless joke. "Blake, what?" she whispered, her voice trembling. His smile widened into a predatory grin, a look of pure, unadulterated evil. "Did you really think I would marry you, Ebony?" he boomed, playing to the shocked audience. "Did you honestly believe that a man like me would ever tie himself to some broke-ass cleaner from the fucking Bronx?" The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and whispers. Pastor John stood paralyzed, his face a mask of horror. "What's going on, Pastor?" Blake sneered. "What's going on is that I'm finally telling the truth. These last 2 years, they were a game. A bet I made with myself to see just how gullible a poor, pathetic, God Squad girl could be." Ebony felt the floor drop out from under her. A bet. A game. Her life, her love, her faith a joke. At that moment, the doors swung open and Tiffany strode in, pushing the wedding cake, her pregnant belly proudly on display. "Surprise, you dumb bitch," she yelled. Ebony's eyes darted from Tiffany's swollen stomach to Blake's smug face. The secret looks, the whispers, the pregnancy. It all clicked into place with sickening, soul-shattering clarity. "No, it can't be," she moaned. "Oh, but it is," Tiffany said, rubbing her belly. "I'm 6 months pregnant with Blake's baby. While he was pretending to love you, he was fucking me every single night." A raw, animalistic scream of agony tore from Ebony's throat. Across the room, her mother collapsed into her son's arms. "How could you?" Ebony sobbed, the words barely audible. "How could you be so cruel?" Blake stepped closer, his eyes glinting with sadistic pleasure. "It was easy, Ebony. You were just a hobby, an amusing little project. But honestly, your piety was nauseating, so fucking sanctimonious. I wanted a real woman, someone who knows how to please a man, not some virgin who probably thinks missionary is a dirty word." Every word was a physical blow, stripping away her dignity, her self-worth, her very soul. "All your praying and your praise the Lord bullshit," he continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "It made my fucking skin crawl. Tiffany, now she's a woman who isn't afraid to get down and dirty." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin like talons. "And now," he said, dragging her towards the cake, "it's time for the grand finale." Blake, no!" Pastor John cried, trying to intervene, but Tiffany shoved him aside. "This is where a cleaner belongs," Blake roared, and with a vicious shove, he sent her sprawling into the 5-tier masterpiece. The world exploded in a humiliating mess of vanilla chiffon, buttercream, and shattered dreams. The sound of her fall, the gasps, and the cruel laughter of a few guests echoed in the vast, opulent room. "There," Blake said, pulling out his phone to take a picture. "Now you look the part, a piece of trash covered in garbage." Tiffany was right beside him, recording everything, her laughter high and shrill. Ebony lay on the floor, covered in the ruins of her wedding cake, trapped in the worst, most public moment of her life. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that someone else had just walked into the ballroom, someone who had witnessed the entire horrifying spectacle, and he was about to bring down a holy fucking firestorm of justice. For a few eternal moments, Ebony lay there, paralyzed by the sheer cataclysmic scale of the betrayal. The world was a blur of flashing phone cameras and the deafening roar of whispers, a symphony of her humiliation. Blake and Tiffany were preening, taking selfies with her pathetic, cake-smeared form in the background, reveling in their monstrous victory. "Oh my God, this is going to be all over page 6 by morning," a woman in a Chanel suit whispered excitedly to her friend. Ebony tried to push herself up, but her limbs refused to cooperate. Her $50,000 gown was a ruined, sticky mess. Then she saw them. Her brothers, their faces contorted in a mixture of rage and helplessness, carrying her mother's limp body out of the ballroom. The sight of her unconscious mother was the final, brutal twist of the knife. Pastor John rushed to her side, his face ashen. "My child, let me help you." But Blake stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Leave her there, Pastor," he sneered. "The trash needs to learn its place." That's when something inside Ebony finally snapped. It wasn't just her heart. It was her spirit. All the faith, all the trust, all the hope she had so carefully nurtured for 2 years, it all curdled into a white-hot, righteous rage. She dragged herself away from the center of the room, crawling on her hands and knees until she reached one of the massive marble columns. There, hidden from most of the gawking vultures, She let out a cry that came from the very depths of her soul. A cry directed at the heavens. "God!" she screamed, her voice raw and ragged, echoing through the opulent hall. "Why? Why did you let this happen to me? I served you. I trusted you. I gave you everything." Her pain was so palpable, so visceral that it silenced the room. "I believed he was a gift from you. I prayed for a good man. How could you let me be so blind? How could you let me be played for a fool like this?" Tears and mascara streamed down her cake-smeared face. "Lord, if you are real, if you give a single damn about me, then do something. Show me there is justice in this God-forsaken world. Don't let this evil win." Her raw, desperate prayer was overheard by the man who had just entered the ballroom. Marcus Thorne. He had arrived just in time to witness Blake's monstrous speech and the final degrading push. Marcus Thorne was 42, the silent majority partner in Sterling Capital. Where Blake was flashy and loud, Marcus was understated and lethal. He owned 60% of the company to Blake's 40%, a fact Blake often conveniently forgot. Marcus detested the social circus of New York's elite, but a nagging feeling had compelled him to show up today. Seeing Blake's absolute sadism in person ignited a cold fury within him, the likes of which he hadn't felt in years. He walked over to the column where Ebony was huddled, a crumpled, sobbing heap. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He held out a clean linen handkerchief. Ebony looked up, her eyes meeting a pair of kind, intelligent gray ones. The man was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored suit. He exuded an aura of calm, solid power, the real kind, not the counterfeit bravado that Blake projected. Who are you?" she stammered. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm Blake's business partner," he said, kneeling down beside her, completely unconcerned about his expensive suit. "And what he did to you today is the most despicable thing I have ever witnessed." A bitter, cynical laugh escaped Ebony's lips. "I don't need your pity," she spat, trying to scramble to her feet. "It's not pity," Marcus said calmly. "It's outrage, and it's a promise." "A promise of what?" Marcus looked her directly in the eye, and she saw an honesty so profound it startled her. "A promise that that son of a bitch will not get away with this. A promise that there is justice, and sometimes God uses ordinary people to deliver it." He stood and offered her his hand. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm just offering you a way out of here with your dignity intact. My actions will speak for themselves." Ebony hesitated, looking at his outstretched hand. In the background, she could still hear Blake laughing, regaling a small group of sycophants with the details of his cruel deception. "You know something, Ebony?" Marcus said, his voice now laced with steel. "Blake thinks he won today, but he just made the biggest, most catastrophic mistake of his life." "How?" "Because he has no idea who really runs his company, and he has no idea that I have been investigating his criminal activities for the last 8 months. A tiny, flickering ember of hope ignited in the ashes of Ebony's heart. "Criminal?" "Blake isn't just an asshole, Ebony. He's a thief, and his day of reckoning has just arrived." She took his hand. It was strong and steady. He helped her to her feet. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Marcus replied, guiding her toward a side exit, away from the prying eyes and cameras. "This is just the beginning. Blake Sterling is about to find out what happens when you fuck with the wrong people." Marcus led Ebony through a service corridor and out to the street, where his black, armored Maybach was waiting. His driver opened the door, and Ebony hesitated. "Where are you taking me?" "To a safe place. I have a private office with a full apartment suite a few blocks from here. You can shower, change, and figure out your next move." The ride was silent. At his office, a sleek, minimalist space overlooking Central Park, He showed her to the suite. "Take all the time you need. There are clothes in the closet. My assistant keeps it stocked for emergencies." Under the scalding hot water of the shower, Ebony let herself break down completely. She sobbed until her body ached, washing away the cake, the grime, and some small part of the shame. When she emerged, she found a simple but elegant black dress and shoes laid out for her. They fit perfectly. When she re-entered the main office, Marcus was on the phone, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I want every financial report from the last 3 years on my desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow, and schedule an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. No excuses." He hung up when he saw her. "Feeling better?" "Physically, yes," she said, sinking into a leather chair. "Emotionally, I don't know if I'll ever be okay." Marcus poured them both a glass of water. "Ebony, I need to tell you the full extent of who Blake really is. What you saw today was just the tip of the iceberg." He opened a file on his desk, revealing a mountain of incriminating documents. For the past 3 years, Blake has been systematically embezzling money from our company. That secret apartment where he met Tiffany, the expensive gifts, this entire sham wedding, it was all paid for with stolen funds. He's laundered over $19 million. Ebony stared at the documents, her own wedding dress receipt among them, paid for by a shell corporation. The reality of it was sickening. "And there's more," Marcus said, his face grim. "Tiffany's pregnancy wasn't an accident. They planned the timing to coincide with the wedding for maximum humiliation." He played an audio recording from his phone. It was a wiretap. Blake's voice filled the room, clear as day. "Imagine it, Tiff. She's standing there all hopeful and shit, and then you roll in, knocked up. She'll fucking die." Then Tiffany's shrill laugh. "I'm gonna live stream the whole thing. It'll be the scandal of the year." Ebony felt a fresh wave of nausea. "How did you get this?" "I hired a private investigator months ago. I suspected financial fraud, but I had no idea about the depths of his personal depravity." He paused, looking at her with a newfound respect. "Ebony, I want to make you a proposition. This isn't charity. This is justice. I want you to help me destroy him. Legally, financially, and socially, I want him to lose everything." Something fierce and powerful awoke within her. Not vengeance, but a burning need for justice. "How?" "First, we go to the feds. With this evidence, he'll be arrested for fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. Second, as majority shareholder, I'm calling a vote to have him expelled from the company and seizing all assets purchased with stolen funds. And third," he said, a grim smile touching his lips, "we're going to make sure every person in that room today who laughed at you knows exactly what kind of monster they were applauding." "What's in it for you?" she asked, her voice steady. "The satisfaction of seeing a truly evil man get what he deserves," Marcus replied, "and a chance to get to know the woman who showed more grace while being destroyed than that bastard has shown in his entire life." She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but unwavering honesty. "I'm in," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "My family. I want them protected. Blake is vindictive. He'll go after them." "Already taken care of," Marcus said. "I have a security team moving them to a safe house as we speak." Tears welled in Ebony's eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. As she and Marcus forged their alliance, Blake and Tiffany were celebrating on a private jet to Rio, completely oblivious that the world as they knew it was about to end. Monday morning, 7 a.m. Blake woke up in a haze of champagne and self-satisfaction in a presidential suite in Rio. The video of Ebony's fall had gone viral. He was reveling in his infamy when his lawyer called. "Blake, you need to get back to New York. Now." "Why? I'm on my honeymoon," he slurred. Because Marcus Thorne called an emergency board meeting, and the fucking feds just raided your penthouse. They have a warrant for your arrest. Fraud, embezzlement. Blake, they have everything. The color drained from Blake's face. Who the fuck talked? Marcus. And he has a co-complainant, Ebony Williams. Blake slammed the phone down, roaring in fury. That fucking bitch! She's working with Marcus! They're trying to ruin me! Back in New York, Ebony sat beside Marcus in the Sterling Capitol boardroom, flanked by federal agents. She was dressed in a sharp, professional suit Marcus had provided. She looked not like a victim, but like an instrument of justice. Marcus methodically laid out the years of Blake's crimes to the horrified board members. At 2 p.m., Blake stormed into the lobby of Sterling Tower, Tiffany, and a team of lawyers in tow. He was met by a wall of security. "Mr. Sterling, you're not permitted on the premises," the head of security, a man who had been on his payroll for a decade, said flatly. "The hell I'm not! I own this company!" Blake screamed. "You owned a piece of it," Marcus said, appearing at the top of the escalators. "The board has voted unanimously to expel you. You're out." Just then, Ebony appeared at Marcus's side. The sight of her, poised and powerful, sent Blake into a rage. "You fucking ungrateful bitch! After everything I did for you!" "Everything you did was a lie," Ebony said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. "And now you're going to pay for every single one." "Oh, I get it," Blake sneered, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. The little saint already found herself a new sugar daddy. "You watch your mouth," Marcus warned, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. 2 federal agents stepped forward. "Blake Sterling, you're under arrest." As they snapped the cuffs on his wrists, in the lobby of the empire he had built on theft and lies, Marcus turned to Ebony. "Vindicated?" She thought for a moment. "No, at peace. Justice is being served." 2 years later, Ebony was once again in a wedding dress. This one was simple, elegant, and chosen by her. The ceremony wasn't at the Pierre. It was at the New Hope Pentecostal Church in the Bronx, packed to the rafters with the people who truly loved her. And the man waiting for her at the altar was Marcus Thorne. Over the past 2 years, their alliance had blossomed into a deep, respectful, and powerful love. He had become a part of her family, and she had become the center of his world. Blake had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He'd lost everything. Tiffany had given birth to their son alone, and was working as a receptionist to make ends meet, completely disowned by her family. As Pastor John pronounced Ebony and Marcus husband and wife, a joyous cheer erupted from the congregation. 6 months later, Ebony told Marcus she was pregnant. He wept with a joy he hadn't felt since before his first wife had died years ago. Sterling Capital was renamed Thorne & Williams Investments, with Ebony as a managing partner, having earned her business degree at night, paid for by Marcus. One Sunday, standing in their church, with Marcus holding their beautiful baby girl, Hope, Ebony gave her testimony. "Brothers and sisters," she said, her voice clear and strong, "in my darkest hour I screamed at God for justice. Today I can tell you that not only did he deliver justice, he blessed me beyond my wildest dreams. I learned that sometimes you have to walk through the darkest, shittiest valley to appreciate the view from the mountaintop." Ebony had turned her greatest humiliation into her greatest victory, and Blake Sterling, scrubbing floors in the prison laundry for pennies an hour, had learned the hard way that when you sow evil, you reap a fucking whirlwind.